Hi, Kenzie.
How you doing?
I'm great. I'm really excited to be doing this workshop with you.
Oh, me too. Me too. I popped my head in and saw a little bit of yours and Zach's workshop, and I loved everything that you two were talking about. Specifically, I love the empowering message behind masturbation, because I know that that's so scary for so many people. And I know that we're going to float into some of that solo sex area too today, but I just wanted to say I loved it. It was so empowering and so good. I'm jotting down notes and excited to tell my partner about it tonight.
Fantastic. I mean, I love the fact this is an opportunity that we get to have these interactive experiences, and I get to meet other, Lovehoney experts like yourself, and that we can really have these conversations that everybody needs to be having. And a lot of times most people find them difficult.
Absolutely, for sure. So let's start off by introducing ourselves. I know that some people who are here, went through the last workshop and definitely know you a little bit, but I definitely like a little refresher. And for those who don't know, we can chat a little bit about ourselves. So I'm a mental health influencer and advocate. I talk primarily about body love and body confidence and self-care. And I love how recently I started talking more and more about sex on my platform, and my community was here for it. I was so surprised. I felt so shy, even though that I talk about sex quite openly and quite confidently in my own personal and private life. But I never started a platform, talking about sex and being so open on it. But now that I have been, my community seems so receptive to it, and it feels so good to be able to have really interesting and human conversations about it on a platform like that. So I really love talking about sex, and I'm so excited today to chat about some of the topics today, dorm room sex, consent, and boundaries. And so I'm looking forward to that.
As am I. So just a little bit for people who may not have gone on the last workshop. I'm Dr. Fleming. I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm here in New York City, and I've been practicing 20 years focusing on sexuality and relationships. And I'm a kind of media go-to expert because I give practical advice and easy to guide follow suggestions. And my passion is helping people own their pleasure and recognizing, identifying those blocks and barriers, of which there are often many, not the least of which can be cultural, right? And anyway, that is my wish, is for everybody to have their own great life with great sex. And we all get to define our own. That's sort of my vision. Hence my website is greatlifegreatsex.com. So anyway, if anyone wants to follow me later, I'm always happy to be sharing great sex tips. And I'm really thrilled to be doing this right now with you, Kenzie.
Yeah, absolutely. So why do we think that talking about dorm room sex, talking about sex when you're living with other roommates and, living in close quarters, why is that important, right now during this time?
Well, I think first of all, as we're saying, this is a different time, right? So we're definitely going to have a conversation that is not just dorm room sex. Some colleges only freshmen are allowed, and sometimes you can't even have anybody in your room. So we can talk about long distance options, which will be fun. And a lot of people went home and they're living with parents right now. So these same principles are absolutely going to apply. But I think that, it's just important that people recognize what can go wrong is your roommate or your family. You're living in a tight quarters with someone. And so it's how do we respectfully own our sexuality, our pleasure, our desire to be on our own or with a partner, and do it in a way that we're respectful of the people that we're living with. And we're going to certainly get into all the different ways that can look.
Yeah, definitely. When I first moved down to the city, I was living in a bachelor with a roommate, and that was very interesting. Let me tell you, lots of conversations to navigate, so many ways that we could have been disrespectful to one another, but we managed to avoid that. And it was through a lot of vulnerable conversations, but these types of conversations I think are more important than ever. Plus, even if you don't necessarily live in a dorm room, you may be like living with people, or you may be in a long distance, anything. And I just think that so many different sex conversations are cross applicable. You know, you can like really pick and choose from that advice, or from the stories being shared under one topic, and just like have it be an umbrella, you know, piece of advice or whatnot. So I'm really excited to chat today about all of that stuff. So I know that we're living closer than ever because of COVID, and especially in places like dorm rooms. What do we think that the main issues are that come up when living in a dorm or living in close quarters?
Well, I think in many ways it's, again, how do you navigate? I mean, I was asking my nieces and nephews and some other college age kids I know, and, you know, some of the creative things that they would think about. You know, it's not necessarily do not disturb sign or locking the door, because you don't want to lock out your roommate, you know, especially if it's late night. But it's really like putting like up a tapestry, or, you know, like there are different ways of creating barriers and being very respectful, or sort of sharing when, hey, you think you could go for that shower, because it's not uncommon, right? In college spaces, it might be a community shower. So, you know, while you're getting on or having a quickie, your roommate could be having a leisurely warm shower. And I think it's really helping college students think out of the box what it can look like, and how do you communicate around that, right? Is it a text? Is it, you know, a code word that you both have? I've even heard like putting a scratch on the door, right? Is an indication of I'm not alone. So like it can be really playful, and it can be really unique to think about. And that's the pieces we're really trying to help roommates or people living together have these conversations. I mean, partners are finding it hard to talk about sex. So the fact you're trying to talk to a roommate, somebody you don't even know, at least freshman year, right? It isn't always so easy, but I think, again, it's a huge opportunity to just sort of normalize these conversations and realize we're going to be hopefully in countless of them in our lifetime.
Absolutely. I think like one of the main issues that definitely comes up is the fact that the people who are living in close proximity to one another have to practice like hard communication. Like you just have to communicate. There's no, you know, literally beating around the bush, being like, so can you take that shower? And like insinuate stuff. It needs to be explicit. You need to have those conversations. You need to be quite communicative. And I know that that is so difficult in general. You know, we're not a society that practices perfect communication. And so that's definitely something that has come up personally with me before. Definitely been an issue with, you know, previous roommates and whatnot, that needing to work through to be better communicators. And I just wanted to let the attendees know as well that we have a Q&A happening, and you can just click over to the Q&A and you can ask a question, and it's going to stay completely anonymous. They're not going to be public or anything like that. So you can ask whatever type of question that you want that pertains to obviously the topic that we're talking about, and it'll remain anonymous. So moving on, what's like the first things that you think that we should discuss with a roommate when we need our own intimate time?
Well, I think it's partly, you know, we talk a lot about self-care, and I sort of say self-care is not selfish, and intimate time with your partner to me is an extension of that. And in order to have that, you do have to negotiate the time and the opportunity. And so I think you're sort of pitching it from a perspective of wellness and, you know, care of yourself and quality of life. And but also importantly, it's what you want for your partner as well. So I think that's an important piece of it.
That's such a good way to put it. Like if you are thinking of sex as like a piece of your health, and if you're thinking of it in a wellness perspective, which we should be, because there's so much stigma around it anyways. And I think when you frame it in an essence of health and in an essence of wellness, it relieves some of that stigma. And so when you're bringing it up to your roommate, you can have that in mind, and then you can feel more confident with it. It's not so like awkward, and it's not so weird to bring it up or whatnot. I definitely think that one of the first things that we should discuss with a roommate is just like, how are you comfortable with like me bringing someone over? Are you comfortable when I ask, like, I need some, of my own alone time for, just for me to be myself alone in this space? I think that's definitely one of the first things that I think someone could bring up to their roommate. I also think like making it like interactive and like fun, like, hey, what do you think we should we use a code word? Is that more comfortable for you? Or should I put a scrunchie on my door? Or should I like put a tie around my door? Or like whatever it is, and make it like collaborative, like instead of you bringing something up and then like you, just in case if that person might feel defensive or vulnerable or whatever it is, you can make it collaborative. And at that point, I think it's just like, there's like a union and like an understanding and all of that.
And I think an important piece of this is, because again, you're framing from a mental health and well-being perspective. It's like your partner or roommate may or may not, right, be in a relationship or on Tinder or look like looking for their next opportunity. And so what I would say is, when you frame it from as you sort of said earlier, like a lot of people need some of their own time, some quiet time, some downtime. If you're constantly, maybe less so for an extrovert, but for some of us, even for extroverts, there's something about your own time. What you get to choose to do with that time, it's up to you. So I think when you frame it is in the service of both of it, we all need our own time. How do we plan that on the calendar in a sense? And it may or may not include solo sex and or partner sex, but or you just reading a good book or listening to some music or just dancing around and having a good time. But you kind of want alone time and just sort of generally having a conversation from the value of having alone time. And then you get to choose spontaneously in the moment how you want to use that time.
Yeah, I love that too. So instead of even approaching them from a place of like, hey, I want sex or I want alone time for this, you can approach someone with the framework of, I just need alone time in general. And so do you. How can we negotiate this? And how do we respect each other's boundaries when we need those, those times of aloneness or those times with our partners or whatever it might be? What are some of the best ways to have quiet sex, do you think? Because this is a huge issue too, is the fact that we're all, a lot of us are living so close to other people right now in dorms, moving back home with roommates. What are some of the best ways to have quieter sex?
Yeah, and I live in an apartment building in New York City with 2 kids, right? So the last thing they want to be hearing is their parents having sex. On one hand, from a positive role model, I want them to know we're having great sex 20 years in. But on the other hand, right, that kids don't want to hear that. So I think a few things. One is you got to be mindful, and that. So you could use pillows. You're just sort of mindfully not using your voice, which in some ways is kind of a bummer, because the more auditory and loud we are, often the more aroused we're getting, and there's kind of more intensity there. But again, there's a time and a place, right? And so I think pillows, but a great thing is the role of music, right? Like, how do you create a distraction, or you might even want to give your roommate your noise cancellation headset, or there's just lots of opportunities, I think, to be respectful and try to create a sense of privacy if for whatever reason you're not able to negotiate a time where you can't both be there, right? So again, you might have a barrier, so you're not feeling sort of visually exposed or seen, but you also like to have a greater sense of like not feeling like you're being heard.
Yes, absolutely, for sure. There have been certain toys that I've bought off of like particularly Amazon, like a long time ago. And they show up and I'm like, oh, I'm so excited. And I live with a roommate and I'm like, oh, I'm so excited. And they'll go to bed and like, I'll bring out my toy and it's like, wah! And it's like so loud. And I'm like, oh my God, why didn't I read the reviews? Why didn't I look this up before? This is terrible. I'm like trying to muffle it with like 100 pillows. And it's like just bad news bears in general. And so that's when I'll like put the music on. And I think like creating that other stimulus in the room helps like obviously drown out some noise and stuff. Giving them noise cancellation headphones, very bold. Love that idea, totally. And what do you think about, shower stuff? Because in the shower, that's a very discreet way to have some alone time with yourself or with your partner.
Yeah, I think definitely shower time could be a great opportunity. Again, assuming it's not a community shower situation,
Right.
or a
Enough, yes.
shower situation.
Yeah.
And again, essentially a bathroom becomes another room, right? So there's also the toilet. You can put your leg up on. I mean, there's all sorts of ways you could use bathroom creatively, even if you have maybe if you're not even in the shower, which of course you could be, but you could just have it running, right? Again, sort of that noise. So again, I think it's just sort of getting creative. And again, going back to that quiet, it's like, it could be, sometimes beds squeak. You might be on a phone or whatever. So again, what about getting on the floor, or, putting a blanket on the floor, and thinking also about certain positions that might work for you, knowing thyself, right?
Right.
More side to side, maybe a position that isn't as deep thrusting if you're a moaner, right? Like, take that into account. And I want to touch base on also what you said, which is, again, so culturally, there's so much shame and guilt around sexuality. Instead of like, isn't this awesome? Look how loud this toy is, right? I'm glad my knows I'm giving myself pleasure.
Yeah.
Our tendency is to be like, shh, quiet, So I don't think we're there yet, because again, it's obviously respectful. We don't want to be intrusive on people's boundaries.
Right.
And I think where the want to be quiet comes from, but I think it also comes from a little bit of, you know what I mean? We don't want to be seen in.
It's stigma. It's like if people hear me doing this, then they're going to think a certain way about me, and I can't let that happen, because then the dynamic is going to be weird. It comes from a shame place for sure. Like, someone's going to potentially shame me for this. And I think that's actually like good to bring up in general, like, thinking back on it now, that could have been a really funny story I could have told my roommate, and I could have just brought it up as like an after thing, like, hey, I was like, doing some sexual health, and I was like going to go experiment with myself with this toy, and it was really loud, and in my head I thought that maybe you would shame me for it, and then you can have a conversation about shame. And I think that hopefully, fingers crossed, that this would be a roommate, a friend, even potentially a family member who is open with their heart enough and honest enough that they can have that conversation with you, and they'll hold space for you, and they won't shame you. And I think that's like one of the biggest things too, is like having that supportive community and being able to have people around you that encourage that about encourage like health and wellness in those ways, I think is so important. And I know that particularly when we were talking about toys being really, really, really loud, I know that Lovehoney has this one toy, and it's called the Silencer Whisper. And it is this vibrator, and it comes with different vibration settings. And it's one of the quieter ones. And it's like, if we are living in times when we are so close to one another physically, but we don't want to be close to one another in, the auditory realm, then we should be like investing in toys that are a little bit quieter to respect everyone's boundaries and whatnot. Again, I really wish my younger self had researched some of it. If she wasn't ready to have those conversations with her roommate, she should have been like investigating and researching a little bit more. But it's definitely like, it happens to the best of us. What about living? Yeah.
Again, because shame is so pervasive, we've come from a very puritanical culture, and that, shame is also sort of the number one killer of pleasure. And so, oftentimes the reason these conversations are difficult is because we're anticipating it's not going to be received well. And this is true of all anxiety. It's about the future, and people often sort of catastrophize and think about worst case scenarios. And like I said, I've been practicing 20 years. Almost always people say it's never as bad. If anything, their partner or friend might be being like, oh, I didn't know how to have that conversation with you, right? Mm-hmm. It's one of you is the older one to break the ice. And so certainly the value of doing that. And just as you love that vibrator, I'm going to pull out the little one. The reason, this is their Ignite from Lovehoney. And the reason I love this one is, first of all, it's waterproof, so it'd be great for your shower. But also that it's much smaller than I don't have it in front of me. the one you were mentioning. But they both have the variable speeds and, the travel locks and all sort of things that make them great. And they're both on the quiet side. But I think 2/3 of women don't have orgasms with clitoral stimulation alone. So having, thinking about your dorm room, I would like you to have a little nightstand or a little box that has your lubricant, your sex toys, your condoms, whatever you might be using for safe sex, that you're not feeling like, oh, wait a minute, let me go get the things that you want and need and are part of your turn on and your arousal, like they're just right there. I think that's really important. Because sometimes there's shame. Like I have people, they move their sex toys for the cleaning people. I'm not kidding you. They don't want them to be seen. And I'm like,
wow, that's so interesting. And I mean, yeah, it definitely comes from that shamey place. So I definitely totally understand it. I've 100% been there, but wow, that's like very, very, very intense. Let's discuss consent first and foremost. How do you define consent in a really concise way, Megan?
Well, I think the most important thing about consent is in a sense that it's enthusiastic consent. Like people think that consent kind of like asking a partner to be tested for STIs, again, it feels like this heavy thing or like it's a hard conversation. And I'm like, actually it's not, right? Like what you want in a partner is like enthusiastic. Hey, would you like to try? Yes. Yeah. Or, but it's the important piece around it is that we are, and this is, I think, important for us generally as human beings, we'd like to know what's about to happen, And so if you say, I'm really interested in, would you like to, there are many ways of asking for consent that doesn't have to be a really big or hard conversation. But I think the most important thing about consent to recognize is it's ongoing, right? Like it can change in a given moment, right? Like, you got to be looking at nonverbal body language. You got to be intuitive. You got to be aware of, has this person been drinking or smoking powder or the drugs? Like you always want to be mindfully aware of like what else might be compromising their own ability in a sense to be fully able to consent. But that when you have a partner there and can, like, it's kind of fun. Like you almost push the limit, like, hey, are you interested in, would you like to? And they're going to let you know, because I think it's always about expanding our repertoire in terms of discovering all the different things that give us pleasure.
Absolutely. Something that there's like one phrase I love about consent is that consent is coherent, ongoing, clear, and sober. I think it's something like that. And it's really interesting. The last few years, I feel like the consent conversations have really boomed and skyrocketed, especially since the Me Too movement. And that's so important and necessary and way long overdue. And it's something that I considered it as like a place, within sex. Like I understood it within a place of sex. I just never understood it in a place of just bodies and respectability in general. And so I love framing consent as like a value, like a moral and a value, like we do things with each other with consent. And like you said, like consent can change and stuff. And that's because boundaries can change and whatnot. And so I love the fact that we're bringing that up as well, I think is so important and not something that I realized when I was younger. And when I, had my first few partners, I would consent to one thing, then we would be in the middle of it. And then I realized that, I don't really like it, or maybe it hurt too much, or maybe it just really wasn't for me. And I didn't feel like I could change my mind. I didn't feel like I could be, I didn't feel like I could be someone who could say no. And that affected my relationship with sex, because then I maybe thought I didn't like sex as much, but I wasn't having the right sex and I just wasn't respecting my own boundaries. And so consent is, oh my gosh, so important. And I know that consent can be influenced by a lot of things. It can be influenced by age. Legally, someone doesn't have decision-making capacity to give consent if they are under the legal age of consent in their country or region. Being asleep or unconscious, that is an automatic no. Being under the influence of alcohol or drugs, the use or threatened of force, mistaken identity, any position of authority or power, intimidation, or coercive conduct. So, and consent is so important because we honor each other's boundaries through that.
Right. I think it's really about, the intention is to give someone pleasure and to keep each other safe. And the ongoing conversation around consent is about creating the safety. And I think historically, we could get into women's rights and things that they couldn't even do until the 1970s, like have their own checking account. But I think that there's a background where, if you said yes to sex, we didn't feel like you could change your mind to other sexual acts or expressions. And so I'm really happy. My daughter's 17 today. So the fact that younger women are growing up because I'm part of the Me Too movement, right? That that consent is definitely a conversation that that wasn't even on the table when I was going through high school or college. And even, speaking to like niece and nephews, that one of them actually before their freshman year had to do a training on consent, and also talking about like alcohol and the different factors that can change consent. So they're even coming in with that conversation, and that even in the bathrooms, right, there's information posted about consent, and or also if you feel something, was against your consent, right, and where do you go and what are the resources? So, because I've definitely had clients where it was unconsensual, and that there was just such stigma and shame, and it just really, from a mental health perspective, they didn't feel like they had the resources or the people to talk to. So I'm really happy to say I think we're coming a long way, that this is becoming a very normal part of conversations for healthy adults to be having.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Do you have any personal short stories that you could tell? Because I definitely have a few about withdrawing your consent after you've given it, and, a positive experience that you've had doing it, because I feel like we need to hear more positive stories of that to help us feel brave and comfortable in that moment when you are withdrawing your consent.
Well, I think some of it is our languaging, right? Which is, I'm hearing you say, or I'm getting that you want to do anal sex. And I'm not sure if that's globally off the table, but I can tell you right now how I'm feeling in my body. It's not comfortable. I feel like this is something I need to be more aroused to try. And so, can we go back to, again, maybe it's oral sex, or it's penetrative sex, or it's a sex toy, or it's mutual masturbation. But I think it's again, that ongoing conversation, because you're always sort of checking in, because you're trying new things on, right? Like, I love that they're trying things on, but I also say we never know, we don't know until we're in that moment. We can't know until we're in that moment how we think about something. And we can have an idea about something, say even anal. Like many people, it's not a neutral word, right? A lot of people hold tension around it or don't have a positive association when they may never have even put a finger there to see whether or not, rimming, I kind of like that sensation, right? Or prostate play. So I think we help ourselves when we allow ourselves to get out of our comfort zones to try new things on, but then have the boundaries when, if it feels too much too soon, that we back away. But it's part of the conversation is, I want to continue to explore with you. And I don't know if it's forever, but it's definitely for right now. It's not a good time, or not for now.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I like that too. If something is too soon or too much, that's when you can have that body awareness and that mental awareness to say like, okay, something's happening right now that I don't really like. Because sometimes also, if for personal experiences, sometimes not so much anymore, but before, I could go through sex and then afterwards I would know that I didn't like some of that stuff, but I didn't really realize it in the moment because I was so focused on performing for my partner. Like I was so focused on, being a good sexual partner for them that I forgot to have my body awareness and just being conscious of my own experience during that time. And I know that, with my current partner and previous partners, I started to get better at telling them in the moment what I liked and what I didn't like. Even like what you said before, even if I consented to something prior in the moment, if, leading up to it or during it, I was like, you know what, actually, like I changed my mind. I was really nervous at first to start being so open and honest with my partners. But then I realized that like, it's so cliche to say, but communication is so sexy, and it's such a turn on in the middle of the bedroom when like someone can be open and honest. Like you feel just so present with them. Like, it forces you to just be more present with them. And then when I realized that, like, my partner always supports me and they want me to have a good experience too, why would they not want me to withdraw my consent at any time if that suits me and if that's making me safe and comfortable and feeling good and well or whatever it is? And so it's really about like just like leaping into that open and honest and brave communication and like going for it, and respecting your boundaries is just, it's so important, and it's going to make the whole experience so fruitful and so much more better. And I think it's just going to also enhance the connection that you have with yourself and with your partner at the end of the day.
And I'm willing to bet, because I could talk a bit more on this, but I would say the majority of those conversations went better, if not all those conversations, than you imagined with your partners.
Yes. Oh my God. Yeah.
And that's the part we want to highlight to people. We get in our heads, and we make it this big deal. And more often than not, they're happy. And because again, we want the turn on is getting your partner turned on for most of us, and creating those safe spaces. And so, and as you're describing, those are vulnerable conversations, but there's intimacy and there's presence. And I think that brings a greater sense of closeness. And it sort of builds the trust, and I think the foundation of a relationship. Like, I think to explore sexually and to be a little bit more adventurous and go out of your comfort zone, you always need sort of the secure base, the safety net of the relationship, because you never know when you're going to get a little too far and feel like you got to come back a little, and that your partner's got your back.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Completely. We have a few questions. I would love to give us a chance to answer them. So our first question says, Megan, I'm really curious what you'll say with this. What about self-love / masturbation in a shared room?
Well, again, it's interesting. That's a shared room, and we're talking about college, but I work also with the people who've been married, and, their own self-conscious is masturbating when their partner's asleep.
Wow.
Not necessarily. Yeah. So, again, I think it's about being respect. Like if your partner or your roommate is asleep, and or again, sort of having sort of established a sense of expectations, but that there's nothing wrong in any level about self-stimulation or solo sex, but like when you're little and you're exploring, you're like, but in the privacy of your own bedroom, right? So I think that, you just want to be mindful, because again, you might be super stealthy and quiet and it would never be known, and you might get a really quiet sex. So or again, using your fingers, certainly coming back to Lovehoney, like not only lube, because lube makes experiences better, but like, I love this Ignite, right? This is one of the sexual sort of, it basically is like tingling and warmth and a new sensation. So it's like this in your fingers, you could be incredibly quiet and your roommate wouldn't necessarily even know that you're masturbating, right? Or you're giving yourself pleasure. So I think it's context specific, but that if they're sleeping or finding time, as we talked about in the very beginning, where you're alone, you just want to just be respectful, that you're not it's sort of coming up against their own boundaries.
Right. Yes, absolutely. For sure. I mean, I echo all of your sentiments. I think like at a specific point, toys can only go so quiet. And that's where I think like lubricants are almost like their own version of a toy, because it just makes things feel so different. And, your fingers can all of a sudden turn into a different toy in that way. And so in the shared room, gotta be quiet, gotta like, you could even like, again, talking about going to the shower to have your alone time and whatnot, and hoping that occasionally your roommate works nights or, spends extended periods of time outside of the flat. The second question that we have is, what quiet toy recommendations do you have? And I had the one earlier. Lovehoney has this amazing silencer whisper that comes with 7 speeds. It's also like, and I'm not selling this. I'm not getting paid to sell you anything at all. I don't get anything from that whatsoever, but it is really affordable. The Silencer Whisperer. It's really affordable and it's available on the Lovehoney site. Also, Lovehoney has this Ignite 20 function vibrating love egg. And it's just like the coolest egg with like a little like remote at the end of it. And again, like you have that?
I have both actually. And this might be fun to talk about because this one, again, is a different speeds and remote, but this one gets to be connected to an app, right? Which you can program for yourself or your partner can actually remotely be controlling. And so again, when you might be not close to your partner, I mean, again, there are many different sex toys that you can make happen remotely, but that's kind of like a fun thing to experiment with too. And the other one which is not actually probably as inexpensive, but it's the Womanizer. And it's the premium, which has a smart silencer on it. And what I like about the Womanizer, the Satisfiers, most people are used to vibration as like sort of the go-to. Bullet Rabbit is a sex toy, which again, fantastic, amazing, but I'm all about trying new things. This tech is really about sort of airflow, and it's basically, it's a fluttering sensation. So it mimics more of like oral sex. So I always think people should have their favorite, but always sort of every once in a while be like, oh, what's unique? What's a different kind of stimulation that I haven't yet tried that you want to explore, again, on your own or with your partner?
Love that. All right, next question. What do you recommend to students who are coming to terms with the new college experience, which is usually about sexual freedom and exploration, given the circumstances we're in now? So I think that question is asking, and to the person who asked it, let me know in the Q&A if I've got this right. But I think what they're saying is that, you know, college is supposed to come with this like idea that you get this sexual freedom and exploration in it. But right now, a lot of college kids are actually at home because they can't actually go to campus. So what advice do you have for them, Megan? I have some thoughts, but I want to hear yours.
Well, I mean, I think first of all, it's to appreciate this is a pandemic, right? This has never happened before. And college isn't what it was. Like, I mean, I know so many people who are taking a gap year, or it's all online and remote, or very, you know, they could go to the campus, but all the buildings, you know, are pretty much shut down, or it's to-go meal. So I think first I want to just sort of have empathy and compassion, recognizing that, especially like, you know, you didn't get your prom. Many people, like, they didn't get the end of their senior year. And this is a very, it's a developmental life event that sort of marks coming into adulthood. And so I think it's to say and to acknowledge some of the reality, which is right now in this moment, it's not going to be forever. We can see the light at the end of the tunnel. But yes, in this moment, if you're really being careful, and, you know, in so many ways, it's like not just for ourselves, but if you're living with parents or grandparents, right? You know, this sort of an invisible, you can't see whether or not somebody may have COVID. And so I think part of it is recognizing and just acknowledging that this is a very difficult time to have freedom, but that, you know, some people are creating communities. Those who are more like polyamorous, it's like creating like a pod, just like some people get together with their friends. Like, who are those people who, you know, are being really respectful and washing their hands, and that, you know, you might have a small community of people that you feel comfortable to be exploring with sexually.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. I mean, first and foremost, just damn, it sucks. It definitely sucks. I think that the utilizing social media right now to get connected to groups that you would be connected to in college, I think is so important. Doing virtual stuff is so important right now. And then just praying that we get a vaccine within the next few years, then that allows you to then go physically be with those community members that you've already established. I think, like, Megan, you nailed it with that. I 100% totally agree. And, you know, just like feeling the pain and, you know, being able to also have people in that space that you can talk to about that, to like, you know, offload some of that frustration and that some of the bitterness and anger that may come with that, I think is definitely important. But also, with that being said, I think like pay attention to yourself and your wants and your desires, and don't stop your curiosity whatsoever. Use your resources that you have, like the resources that Lovehoney is giving us, the resources that, you know, just internet is like a plethora of resources in general. I think using your resources and making sure that you're not stopping your curiosity at all is really important. And first and foremost, like being safe and all of that stuff goes in with that. Another question that we have, do you have any advice for young people seeing a new partner who are skeptical about introducing sex toys into the bedroom? And I think that I would say that is, again, you got to be bold, you got to be brave, you got to just get in that open and honest communication. Something that I loved that you and Zach were mentioning is that, you know, no person can compete with a vibrator in the sense that no body can vibrate like that.
Right.
You know, and so there's no competition there. And it's a different sensation on your body that both of you get to enjoy. And so I know that when I'm bringing a toy into the bedroom, my partner and I both realize that this is a chance for both of us to be stimulated in different ways. And to me, it's like, if someone is insecure about that, about, you know, their partner bringing in a toy, I think that's stuff for them to work on. I think it's amazing that a partner feels comfortable enough to bring that toy in general. What do you think, Megan?
Well, I think, and I mentioned this with Zach, I often, because I'm often quoted in the media, I will go, well, I read in Cosmo or Men's Health or Esquire, like, because it's easier sometimes to introduce the idea. My best friend told me, you know, or I read something about this new toy and like this amazing new technology, or wow, different kind of lube or warming gel, whatever it might be. Sometimes, and I read it and I was like, ooh, like that might be fun to try or interesting. What do you think? Right? It's that opportunity, kind of in a safe way. Like, it wasn't my idea. Like, I read it and I thought it sounded good. Like, I'd be curious and want to try it on. What do you think? So that it doesn't feel as much a rejection if your partner might not be into it. And an important thing I want to say here is, and when, if this is so important for couples, when if your partner says no or isn't into it, we revisit it sometimes later, like 6 months, 3 months, a year, these sexual conversations, because it's as you get to know someone and you feel more trust and you're more relaxed and there's more safety, it's amazing what you might be willing to try, you know, in the future that doesn't feel right to you in this moment. And I think working with couples, often if they try something, like I joke, for me, my husband was role play when we were dating, and it was like, he was so good at it. Like, we were like a stranger, he's picking me up on my rooftop in New York. And I was like, whoa, like it freaked me out because I'm not into strangers. You know what I mean? Like, I don't feel safe in that situation. And so like, I would tell you, we didn't role play probably for a decade, right? Because it's like, you don't revisit, sex toy or otherwise, you often don't revisit something that you don't have a good response to. And so saying to mine is always try again. Like, maybe it depends on the strength of the reaction. Maybe it's 6 months or a year, 2 years, right? Or it might be like, that toy didn't really quite speak to me, but like, give it a try a few times. Because anytime we try something new, we're spectating, we're observing. What do I think about it? What does my partner think about it? We're in our heads. We're not as much in our bodies. So I think we really have to kind of give it the college try.
Oh, yeah. I love how you said that, for sure. I think that, you know, we've only got about a minute left. And I think that everything that we're saying definitely comes down to like consent and boundaries, negotiation, and like continuing to be curious, continuing to, you know, be an observer of your own body and other bodies and the boundaries that those bodies ask for and that they're communicating about. And I love that. I think that it's so important to watch ourselves in those moments when maybe we're feeling uncomfortable, or even when we're feeling comfortable, and realize that like we're being a spectator of that event as also being someone who's participating in it. I think that's such like a beautiful framework, because then you're both observing and you're also doing, and there's some freedom in that. So Megan, this was so much fun.
I definitely had an amazing time doing this with you, and I'm thankful that Lovehoney created this opportunity for us. And I look forward to doing it like this with you again sometime soon.
Yeah, likewise. And I definitely feel like, you know, even just as myself, and I feel like, you know, I do feel like I'm sexually confident and I'm sexually empowered, but even after this conversation, these types of conversations remind me of that empowerment and remind me of that strength. And I feel really happy that we had this, and I'm excited. And I feel like I have so much to share on social media now. I feel like I have so much to talk about right now. So I'm buzzing a little bit, but thank you so much to everyone who joined. And thank you so much to Lovehoney for putting this on. Really, really, really appreciate it.
Bye, everybody.